threatens to undo this progress.
Well, this is how the Republicans responded to Obama's speech.
The new Republican Congress also understands how difficult these past 6 years have been. For many of us, the sting of the economy and the frustration with Washington's dysfunction weren't things we had to read about. We felt them every day.
Just the remarks there of Joni Ernst, a Republican, one of the newly elected Republican senators, giving the Republican response there to Obama's speech. You're going to bring back in Jason Johnson now to talk a little bit more about this. Jason, I don't know if you've had a chance to look at the text of her response, but most of it focused on the Republican agenda for the coming year and the fact that they are now very much in control of Congress. What can we expect on that front?
Well, there's a couple of things. First, it has to be pointed out that Joni Ernst did something in her Republican response that President Obama didn't do, which is actually mention Nigeria. And that is something that on social media a large number of Americans have been addressing and saying that the president really missed an opportunity to mention that. But really a lot of what she focused on when she talked about the Keystone Pipeline, she talked about economic freedom, these are the kinds of issues that Republicans are going to, they ran on in the fall of 2014, and they're going to be focusing on when they're dealing with this president. But it's abundantly clear when someone like Joni Ernst, who got into office saying repeatedly that President Obama should probably be impeached, it doesn't really matter what she says in a Republican response because it's highly unlikely that someone who ran on wanting to remove this president is really going to be in the mood to try to negotiate with him to come up with policies to help the United States.
But what about the idea, Jason, that when you are campaigning, there's a certain amount of fierce rhetoric that kind of dominates the discourse, but when the reality of governing sets in, the dynamics are a little different. Is there not a sense of that coming into this?
No, not at all. And the reason is because the Republican Party has consistently won midterms by aggressively attacking not only this president, but all of his policies. And that's been the real disconnect in American politics, that when the entire population comes out to vote during presidential elections, they endorse the president's policies. In fact, on many state levels, things like raising minimum wage and Affordable Care Acts, those things are done at the state level. But the Republicans have come into office under a mandate from their voters that says stop President Obama at all costs. So unfortunately, the realities of governing have never seemed to come into conflict with the ideological motivations that got many of these members of Congress into office.
And as far as, I mean, we just heard there clips from the president talking about Iran and the battle against ISIL. On the issue of Iran, he made mention of the diplomatic gains on that front and the need to continue on that path, and he said that he would threaten to veto any attempt by the Republicans to try to derail that. What should we make of that?
I think the president's very serious, and he's been clear. Look, the deadlines for a nuclear deal with Iran have been pushed back more than once. But the president believes, and many of his advisors believe, and many international observers believe that, you know, putting sanctions, additional sanctions, harsher sanctions on Iran will not in any way move the U.S. or Iran closer to any sort of nuclear deal. So the president is not only asking Congress for time, but he's asking the few Democrats who are left in the House and the few Democrats who are left in the Senate, please don't switch sides. Please do not join any effort to pass tougher sanctions. Not only will it make it more difficult for him to accomplish what he and John Kerry are trying to do, but it will be a huge embarrassment on the international stage if while the president is trying to negotiate a deal with Iran, his own Congress is trying to cut him off at the heels.
Jason Johnson joining us there from Washington with his thoughts on President Obama's speech and the Republican response. Thanks very much for the moment, Jason. Back now to some of the other top stories that we've been following. Thousands of anti-government protesters have marched through the Haitian capital, calling for President Michel Martelly to step down. Martelly began ruling by decree after Parliament was dissolved because its term had ended. The president and the opposition have been locked in a dispute over holding fresh elections. A new cabinet was sworn in on Monday, but many in the opposition have refused to accept it. The Chilean Parliament has approved electoral reforms replacing a system established during General